Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I also want to extend my thanks and gratitude to both the communities that have come together, the organizers that have put so much effort in, to all the volunteer staff as well that have made the Muharram possible, and of course to all the audience for their engagement, their feedback and their support. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all, and inshallah we are given the tawfiq to return next year to also serve Aba Abdullah alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. If there has been any shortcomings on my side, then I seek your forgiveness and also your constructive feedback. It's one thing having positive feedback, that's useful, but it can only take the discussion so far. So if there is constructive feedback, then of course that is even more valuable as well. If we can begin with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha for all of our marhumeen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ثم جعلناك على شريعة من الأمر فاتبعها ولا تتبع أهواء الذين لا يعلمون إنهم لن يغنوا عنك من الله شيئا وإن الظالمين بعضهم أولياء بعض والله ولي المتقين هذا بصائر للناس وهدى ورحمة لقوم يوقنون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. Welcome to our 12th discussion, 11th in the series but 12th night in our series looking at Islam in Britain, Britain in Islam, the forthcoming decade of 2020 to 2030. Tonight, inshallah, we wish to be able to think about a conclusion for the series. We want to draw on some of the ideas at their collective level and think about some starting points as to how you and I can go away and make incremental changes, either within our own selves or within this space in our community, such that when that becomes established and normalized, we're in a better position to be able to export and take those practices outwards. Rome wasn't built in a day. And we also have a whole lifetime. And the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given this lifetime is that He knows that change doesn't come overnight, especially the older we get. The younger we are, it's easier to make those changes. But when you become, my age, when we become older, the gray sets in, the back becomes bent, it's not as easy to be able to change oneself. And similarly, at the communal level, when we have collective cultures, when we have collective practices, it is better for us to focus on three main issues as an example. Make those changes that can be the usul of the changes. They will bring about certain furu', and then we can move on to more and more. But the idea is that without thinking about where we go, we will not then actually take certain things on board. Now, of course, these might be my suggestions. It doesn't mean that these are the only suggestions. It means that these are starting points from my vantage point. Your vantage point will be very different. Your experience will be very different. And so this is part of that ongoing dialogue that is needed for us to think about where certain changes can begin from. If you remember, the first story I started with in our whole series, does anyone remember the opening story that I gave? What was it? The debate, right? The title of the debate was, is the Catholic Church a source of goodness for the world? And if you recall, I said, yes, I believe all faith traditions are a source of goodness. The question was, is this a source of change in our society? And we looked through certain areas as where change comes from. We talked about some of the reasons as to why faith declined as a source of change and why secular ideas actually became the sources of change. I'm going to mention another story now and use this as the segue into some of the points I want to be able to make. In the 17th century, when the Constitutional Committee in the United States was being made, one of the senior leaders at that time, Benjamin Franklin, walked out of that Constitutional Committee. And as he walked out, there was a questioner that asked him a really important and historical question. They said, "Doctor, do we have a republic or do we have a monarchy?" And the answer came, "You have a republic if you can keep it." If you can keep it. This is one of my favorite statements in history, especially around politics, because Benjamin Franklin realized in his wisdom that there's one thing talking about it. There's one thing even signing off a constitution for the United States of America. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to remain. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to progress. The condition, the shart that he made was that you have it. It's blossomed. It's there in front of you. The roots are there. We've made a constitution for you now. And we're willing to fight and to die for it. But its progress lies in your hands. It will be a republic if you can keep it. You see, normally the emphasis would have been just on one class of people, the leadership. That's often the problem that we have within our own communities. That the same leadership ends up taking the same reins, end up doing exactly the same tasks and duties perpetually. Which means that the community cannot move forward beyond just those groups of individuals. It's always the same people that make the chai. It's always the same people that end up in the madrasa teaching. It always tends to be the same people. It's a circular group of people. Actually, to make any community go forward, any nation improve and progress, it needs to continuously be a cycle of people that are taking the reins and then moving it forward in accordance with what their experiences are, what they see is happening on the ground. It's a republic. Not if I, Benjamin Franklin, can keep it. Not if Abraham Lincoln can keep it. If you can keep it. That said that its protection and preservation, its progress and change relies on if it can be achieved, and secondly, if you can achieve it. And so the idea behind this series was to only flag up and talk about certain principal ideas, of which then this would not be the end. For many of us, the 12 nights of Muharram, that's the end in and of itself. Actually, it needs to be the beginning. It needs to be the reform. It needs to be the push. It needs to be the focal point of the source of the passion that we have, and not to be the end in and of itself. One of the books, Sayyid's going to, inshallah, bring it up on the screen. We mentioned this, I think, maybe on the fourth or fifth night, I forget. But we mentioned a book by Matthew D. Ancona, or Andy Ancona, and Matthew writes a really important book by the title of Post-Truth. Do you remember we stated, I think maybe on the fourth night or the third night, we said that one of the great challenges that we have in our era is that we are a post-truth society. Does anyone remember the meaning of post-truth?
When the currency of truth is no longer a natural expectation.
Ahsant. The social currency of truth, speaking truth to one another, is no longer a reasonable expectation. Nay, the opposite also. That's part one. Part two is that actually we now expect lies to come from our politicians and our media. Which means that when we engage with each other, we no longer expect us to tell each other the truth. And I gave you the example. I said, imagine I come up here on the pulpit and you could not expect from me truth. Would it make it a workable majlis? There is an expectation that when I speak, that when we collectively speak to one another, there is truth. I inquire, how are you? I genuinely care. And when you respond and say, I'm good or I need dua, I'm genuinely paying attention to what you're saying. If that was not possible, if you and I met and we spoke and we couldn't talk to each other with the reasonable expectation of honesty and truth, there could not be a working relationship between us. Everything falls down. Now imagine a society that has that. That's where we are, right? Now, when the author writes this book, he goes through this book and he talks about how we've got here to a post-truth society. And I'm going to mention it as part of the way in which I talk about my conclusion. Not that I'm focusing on post-truth society in and of itself, but I want to use what he says. He mentions a number of interesting points. And the first thing he says is, think about some of the major events that happened within Britain and the States, but we're focused here on Britain. He says, think of some of the major events that happened in Britain that gave rise to a lack of confidence between the media and those who imbibe the media. You and I, who are the people who read the media, who listen to it. And he gives certain examples. He says as an example, when the attacks happened on New York in 2001, the 9/11 incident, which is actually the anniversary today, as you know, the grievous incidents that took place, the countries, especially in the West, they immediately realized and they learned very quickly whom the attackers were and where they came from. Now, some people say it was Osama bin Laden. As an FYI, the Taliban, not that we're giving them any praise here, the Taliban said, show us some evidence that it was Osama bin Laden and we ourselves will hand him over to you. Of course, no evidence was ever put forward that it was anything to do with Osama bin Laden. There are some tapes that talk about him saying this, that he talked about the names of those, but it's a little bit iffy here and there. But we do know that 18 of the 21 attackers came from where? Occupied Hijaz, or as you said, Saudi Arabia. So of course, if you're going to attack a place, surely you would go back to the root of the ideology, which would be militant Wahhabism. Correct? The financiers of terrorism in the name of Islam being occupied Hijaz. That would be obvious. Not only that, 18 of the 21 attackers were from there. All the evidence pointed in this direction. Where did they end up going and attacking? Iraq and Afghanistan. And that was off the back of certain lies, wasn't it? There was a dossier, and in the quote, it was a sexed up dossier, and even one of those individuals who ended up speaking out against it was murdered, and all these incidents happen. So according to the author of this book, Post-Truth, he said that was a seminal moment in the history of Britain. That people actually knew that these countries had nothing to do with it, that there were no weapons of mass destruction. Millions of people went out onto the streets to demonstrate in one of the largest demonstrations in the history of this country. And yet the poodle, who is the poodle? Tony Blair. And yet the poodle still went to war and destroyed a number of countries. Until then, yes, sadly, we lost 3,500 innocent souls on 9/11, 2001. But as a result, we lost more than 1 million and many more displaced off the back of that. He says that was a seminal moment in the history of this country, that people no longer could reasonably expect truth from its government, from its media to hold the government accountable, and that now the can of worms has been opened. And he gives a number of other incidents, but he mentions that that's a seminal moment in history. And you can think about that, can't you, for yourselves? Since that moment, how much our world has changed. And then he goes further into it, and he catches up to the point, and he now brings it to the point of the election of Donald Trump, toddler-in-chief, and then he talks about Brexit. So this is a book that's been written very recently, and he talks about how these two events happened in light of post-truth. And he mentions important points. He says the following. He says, as an example, you will notice that there was certain rhetoric around the Brexit events. As an example, you remember that certain members of the Tory party ended up saying things like, the public no longer cares for the opinion of experts. And he begins to list all of the things that Brexit is going to do. He talks about how house prices are going to crash, how we're not going to have availability of people to work in the NHS. It's going to be that all of us are going to be several £100 a year worse off financially. The economy is going, and he gives really boring statistics, one after the other after the other. And he says, look, the problem was that the Remain campaign campaigned for Remain off the back of these boring statistics. Every household is going to be between £300 and £700 worse off. Boring. Like it's not grasping anyone, is it? It's not selling them a reason. And then he moves on to this very important point. He said, as an example, Aaron Banks. Do you remember we talked about Aaron Banks? He's the financier of Leave.eu. Do you remember I mentioned him a few times where he actually tweeted out against Greta Thunberg? She was this young 16-year-old girl who was campaigning for climate change activism. And he actually wrote a tweet saying, let's hope, no freak accident happens to her on her boat. You know what Aaron Banks said in the build-up to the Brexit campaign? He realized that the way in which you're going to have to win is not through boring facts. It's through emotion. You have to grab the people with slogans, simplify it, distill it into one simple message or set of messages that responds, this is the key point, that responds to the grievances of society, and you will win this referendum. Allah yahmak. He says, as an example, take back control. Take back control. Taking back control of our laws, taking back control of our borders. It's a really simple message, isn't it? But we always had control. There has never been a time. There is actually a paper released by this government, a parliamentary paper saying, looking into this claim that we don't have any control. And it was released, sadly, after the referendum. Because, why would you bother to make this information available before the referendum? But it was revealed after the referendum. We've always had control. And the laws that are made in Brussels, we have our own MEPs that go there. So we're still in control of the laws that are made. But it was a simple slogan, wasn't it? Take back control. And then he mentioned across the pond the incident that was actually spoken about later on by Donald Trump himself. One of the statements he made. He actually says this in an interview later. He explains it. He says, one day I was standing on this, the podium platform and talking about my campaign, and I decided to say something off the cuff, extemporaneously. I said, we need to drain the swamp. Some of you at the front are very on the ball here. I like that. Sometimes in class they say, the nerds, they sit at the front of the class. They all put their hands up. I haven't been given an apple but there's some teachers' pets here. I love it. It's excellent. It's excellent. It's not to diminish anyone at the back, but you also know that sometimes the bad kids, they all sit at the back so they can make the noise, they can chew the gum, they can put it underneath I'm just saying, I'm just saying. No, I said. So, drain the swamp. Trump said at the end of it, he goes, I never actually planned this to be a slogan or a key component of my movement. It just came up. But the crowd responded so well to it, my political advisors told me, just keep saying it, just keep saying it, just keep saying it. And eventually it became the mantra of his, I won't say movement, but his apocalypse movement, shall we say. Yeah, so look at this. When we talk about a post-truth society, what's being said? Right? People no longer have belief in what's coming to them. There are simple sloganeering and messaging that is able to drag a whole proportion of the country so far in their thinking that it can actually help elect people like Donald Trump. It can actually help elect or get a referendum passed for Brexit. The sloganeering was as simple as things like take back control. Things like drain the swamp. The author of this book says that if you realize what's going on, that actually people are so in need of something so simple presented to them. And when it's presented to them, if they can see that it's actually responding to their needs, whether or not it's really true, whether or not it's profound, whether or not they actually understand the depths behind it, they will grasp it because it's something that they think is going to respond to their grievances. Their grievances are that they're getting more and more poor. Their grievances are that they think they're doing everything right. They've been told, just be a white, Christian, heterosexual male, just be a good human being. Jesus is going to be there for you. Your country was the supreme country. It used to govern 1/3 of the world. There wasn't a moment in which the sun set on the empire. And now where are these people? Suicide rates are at its peak, especially for men and especially for white working class men. Alcohol and drug abuse is at its peak. Children are being lost into an online world. All the challenges of every sector of the society is upon them. And think about this so carefully. The sloganeering is so simple. The people that are representing themselves as the saviors of the challenges that the people have are so simple. And yet it's responding to their grievances. Do you not imagine, brothers and sisters, an Islam that was actually going to be proactive, that was actually going to be productive, that was actually going to present itself, that was actually going to be able to afford people solutions, that was actually going to respond to grievances in this society. Wallahi thumma wallahi, if someone as simplistic as Donald Trump, someone as addle-minded as Boris Johnson can get their messages across in order for it to be seen, as a response to the grievances of this society. Do you not imagine that if we presented our Shiism, our Islam to the world, to the people of Britain, it would help them in their grievances tomorrow? Are you honestly telling me that with the depth of this religion that you and I have, the extent of the beauty that is within it, and the solutions that we would provide to people, if we were honestly able to provide it, do you not imagine that people would run towards it? Are you telling me that Islam cannot compete with Donald Trump? Are you telling me, and I don't mean it in the jokey sense, I mean it in the truest question. Do you honestly believe that the values that Islam offers to people, it is unable to deal and respond to Donald Trump or to Boris Johnson? How is it that these people have been able to get their message across, but we have not? How is it that they've been able to set out some sort of vision, and we have not? Now, this is the crux of what we've been talking about. That actually, if we had a plan, if we had a vision for ourselves, if we mapped out and said that there is a blank checkbook as to where we want to reach, but where do we want to reach in 10 years' time? What do we want to see this community to be? Do we have targets? Are we holding ourselves account to those targets? I wonder whether we could actually make a change in this society. By God, if they are able to make the changes that they have made in these last few years, believe me, you can also make those changes within society as well. We were talking the other night. As we were driving to Manchester, Sayyid. Maybe you can kindly just repeat something that you mentioned. We were talking about converts. How many converts has there been in your community? Because I can't say it for this one. How many were you saying that there has been in your community in the last 10 years? Maximum 10. And where are they? As in, have they stayed? Have they gone? 90% gone. Our Sunni brethren, may Allah bless them for the good work that they do, they have a plan to bring people into their schools. I don't mean schools as in like madrasa, I mean madhahib. We don't even have a plan. We don't even talk about it. We don't even think about how we're going to bring people towards what we believe is salvation. We've ended with tears, ma'tam, julus, drinking chai. This is the extent of what we believe in. But again, I say it, if Donald Trump can get his message out, and the man can't even string 2 sentences together, the man is a perpetual liar. The man is so insecure that half of his tweets are attacks on other people about their looks. And this is the savior for so many millions of people. Are you telling me if you presented the message of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, people would not run to it? The 6th Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh has a really interesting tradition. And when I saw this, again, it's one of those moments where I just had to close the hadith book and say, look, if I don't think about this text, I'm not doing it value. Here's an amazing hadith. He says, the amr, the affair of the Mahdi, salamullahi alayhi, will not come about. It will not occur until every ideology has been given the opportunity to govern and present itself. And then he explains why. Why? So that let none in the history of mankind say that had we been in charge, we could have made this world better. No, they are going to be given their chance. Capitalism, Marxism, Wahhabism, monarchy, nation states, all of these ideas, all of them, they're going to be given their time to be able to prove and then disprove that they are incapable of being productive for the whole of mankind. They may be productive in small areas, but they may also be very unproductive in others. If you and I truly believe that Islam has something to offer, prove it. Show us it. Show it to the world. And let the world choose. But without even presenting them that choice, us retracting from that space and allowing the Tommy Robinsons of this world, or allowing the Donald Trumps of this world, or allowing, they will take that space that we have neglected, that we have left, and we have decided to make this the space, the beginning and the end of our religion within these 4 walls. There are people out there that are in need. They're dying of spiritual thirst out there. There are people who are desperate for guidance, and their grievances are being responded to by these sorts of ideas, these sorts of ideologies. All of them will come, all of them will go, but the next one will come because we haven't provided a space to be the solution instead. So whilst we retract from that space, when one ideology dies or is seen as being unfeasible, unworkable, the next one will come in, the next one will come in, the next one will come in. And the longer we retract from that space, the longer new ideas will come up, thinking they are solutions, when really they have nothing to offer this world, in the truest sense. So the idea behind this was, for us as a community in Britain, and starting here, what can we do to map out where we want to go and how we want to be able to mold the society in the next 10 years? We won't be able to do everything. We won't be able to have the huge wins that we imagine we will have, wins. But we need to think about where we start and how we go about this. Now, if you remember, we started in the third and fourth nights asking the question about the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alih. And we said, how did the Prophet reflect deeply on his own society? And when he reflected deeply, he was then in a position to be able to make those changes, correct? He could then say, there are grievances amongst these particular groups. I will address their grievances. How do I start? To whom do I start? Who is going to respond negatively and who is going to respond positively? Now, let's unpack this a little bit more and look at one or two narrations around this. I remember we've had the opportunity to meet His Eminence Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Hussein al-Sistani Dama Tawfiqahu on several occasions. How many people here who have had the opportunity, just hands up, who has gone to visit His Eminence Sayyid al-Sistani? I would say that's actually about half of you, more than half of you in the crowd. May Allah grant him a long life. May Allah take us to be able to visit him again and to be able to benefit from his spiritual wisdoms. Let me ask you, of all those people that have either visited him or heard his statements, how many of you have heard the statement from him, the specific statement from him, I pray for you all after Salatul Fajr? Have you heard it? Yeah. This is something that he says to every group. Now, whether it was translated to you or not, I don't know. But this is something he says to every group, from every group. Whether you're coming from the West, whether you're coming from Africa, he will always say, I pray for you after Salatul Fajr. I think a lot of us end up dismissing that statement, taking it to be very simplistic. Like, well, of course you pray for us. If you didn't pray for us, what kind of marja would you be? Of course you pray for us. Actually, it's a lot deeper than that. This is a really wise statement that reflects certain ahadith. What His Eminence Grand Ayatollah Sayyid al-Sistani is saying is that every morning after Salatul Fajr, I have you, all of you, the groups where you are, locationally, geographically, in my mind. And I'm thinking about what you're going through. And I'm making dua to help you in your specific situations. The Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alih, has a very famous hadith. Man asbaha wa lam yahtam bi umur al-muslimin fahuwa laysa bi muslimin. Whoever wakes up in the morning, Salatul Fajr, whoever wakes up in the morning and does not have care or concern for the affairs of the Muslim Ummah, he is not a Muslim. Now, it doesn't mean literally you're not a Muslim, like you're kafir. No. It means that your responsibilities as a Muslim are being neglected. It means that it's kufran and ni'mat. There's kufr of the blessings upon you. and you're not taking into account the realities of what's around you. So based on this statement from His Eminence, what we realize is actually He's thinking about us. But in order to think about us, by priority, you need to know what's going on. Which means if you take this as a lesson for our own selves, when we wake up in the morning, there needs to be an understanding of what's happening to the Muslim community, an understanding of what's happening to the British society. That also means having good sources of knowledge, something practical we can take away if some of us feel like we don't know what's going on with the Muslim community here. We don't know what's going on with the British community. I've been presenting to you a lot of news, haven't I? Sometimes I've asked you, have you even heard of this event? Have you seen these things happening in Leeds, in your own cities? And some of us have said, no, we don't. If you and I don't know what's happening in our own cities, we don't know what's happening to those people around us, then definitely we will not be able to respond. But more than not being able to respond, we actually won't be able to think about for ourselves where we situate with these incidents that are taking place. Just coming to Leeds and spending some time here, having been driven around a little bit and talking to people, you get an understanding, the socio-economic understanding of this city. Some places are very well off. Some places are going through more difficulty. And some of us who live in a bubble, meaning we don't know what's happening beyond the immediate existence that we live in, then we don't actually know what's happening outside of us, even within the walls of this city. That's problematic, because that means that certain currents, changes are happening in front of us, and then we become surprised. How many people woke up on the morning after Brexit and were surprised? What? I didn't know the country was going through this. I didn't know there was a far-right movement. I didn't know that my own government was farming itself out, prostituting itself to the far-right in order to keep itself in government. But if I didn't know what was happening, then I'm in no position to be able to even think about where I stand with these events, let alone beginning to make a change. Listen to this hadith. Listen to this hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Imam says, أعرف الناس بالزمانه لم يتعجب من أحداثه. The person who is most aware, cognizant of the events therein of his time. He understands what's going on in the times in which he lives in. أعرف الناس بزمانه. He's most aware of the events, the times in which he lives in. لم يتعجب من أحداثه. He will not be surprised by the events therein. Here, it doesn't mean just surprised. It doesn't mean ajib in the sense of surprise. It means in the sense of overcome. You will not be defeated by them. You will not be overcome by these events in your own times. The first change is for us to be aware of what is happening. And if we're not, it requires us to get the sources to be able to do so. News sources, to be able to have people who we trust to send us or to send out what's happening. And from there, we'll be in a better position to know what's happening in our own country or in our own city. This is the first humble recommendation to you. Now, after having this little bit of knowledge, we then need to think about some of the changes that we want to be able to make. And as I stated, sometimes we just need to start slow and steady. Sometimes we need to start within our own communities. Why start within our own communities? Because often, if we want to be able to preach to others, and we're not living those values for ourselves, then we're in no position to be able to export them to others in the realist sense. Quran says, لِمَا تَقُولُ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Why do you say those things that you yourself don't do? It is grievous indeed to Allah that you tell others, but you yourself don't do this. One of the Marajit was talking about this. Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi, may Allah grant him a long life, has an amazing statement about this. And he was actually addressing to like the khutaba and the dhakirin before they do like a majlis. And he says, this statement from Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, it is grievous to him that you tell others to do something whilst you yourself don't do it. Do it, and do it in a way that even at the minimal level you have done that thing before you tell others to do it. He gives an example. He said, imagine now, he's addressing the khutaba and dhakirin. He says, imagine tonight you're going on the pulpit and you're going to speak. Imagine your topic is charity. You're going to encourage people to give charity. It's a good thing, isn't it? He says, before you go on the pulpit and give charity, make sure you have given charity. So simple. But immediately that day, before you go and tell others, go and give charity, even if it's 10 pence, the amount is not the important thing. It's that there's no hypocrisy that is coming from within. Go and give. So for us as a community, we need to be able to get sometimes our own house in order, or to think about the progresses that we can make. And as you remember, I mentioned the hadith of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam 2 or 3 nights ago, where it stated that if we are given criticism as individuals or as a community, don't worry about it. It's not a problem. There's no need to feel hurt. Check, are you in line with the Quran? And if so, you have accomplished something without any great effort. Now, as an example, we're thinking about ta'leef, we're thinking about going and achieving on a broader scale. We sometimes have people in our own communities that may not be living as well as others. We also know that even in this city, there are food banks that are struggling. In fact, we got a tweet only 2 days ago from a food bank here from a church saying it's run out of food. I think some of the brothers contacted them and said, can we assist you? And they said, yes. This isn't a one-off. We constantly run out of food in the food banks, they said. This isn't a one-off. So now it might be worthwhile us having a space here within our own mosque where we're able to go and leave some food. Right? As a collection point here. A little notice to say that if you want to leave something, a can or something, a packet of something that's not going to go out of date quickly, just leave it there. And number one, anyone who feels the need for themselves, that they themselves might need to take from that, they're free to take from it. And number two, once a week, once a fortnight, this box, this bin of food will be sent towards the food bank. So at least we're doing something within ourselves to help. Or we talked about, for example, the need for us to be able to make Islam as a resort for our sisters. Now, I'm not saying that I don't understand cultural needs or things like that, the sensitivities of a community. But we do have the biggest complaint from the sisters is that we've been very interactive in these discussions, right? I've been asking you questions, and the A-star students at the front have been giving us their answers. You know, one of the sisters, the young sisters, came to me yesterday, may Allah bless her. She says, you've been talking about equity for sisters, but you yourself, where have you been pushing for other sisters to have equal access to you here? It's a good point, isn't it? I said, if you're criticized, don't be upset by it. Refer to the Quran. Is it correct or not, the criticism? It's absolutely correct. The sisters stated, we would like to be able to engage and give our answers to you whilst you're asking. Why is it only the brothers got to interact with you? Think about this. If I stuck you in the room for 10 nights lectures, which lasted an hour and a half each, and you only got to see the screen, and you didn't get any engagement, especially as a youth who wants to engage, who has a space to be able to engage, be honest, brothers. Would you enjoy the majlis? Be honest, be honest. If you were stuck for 12 nights here in this and only got this screen, and then I was in the sister's side, and you only got to see the screen, this small, tiny screen. I'm not saying your screen's small. I'm saying, imagine you only got to see it through a small screen. Would you be okay with that? No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. And you really wouldn't. And we have the space. We have so much space. The lectures aren't that good that we have people coming to in their thousands, right? There's big Maulanas out there. Yeah? It's very easy for us to be able to accommodate that. And even look at the wording, accommodate. We shouldn't have to accommodate. We should be making justice. It's all well and good saying, let's go out and make Islam a resort for women. But even if in the whole community center, the sisters don't feel accommodated for. And as I've said to you before on many nights, I know I'll say things that people won't appreciate. I'm not here to make you happy. I'm not here to play the banjo and then you know, this is not here for entertainment. We need to get to real solutions for the challenges that our communities face. And if we can't even open up the dialogue, or we can't feel like we can have a dialogue about problems, then we're stuck without even having anything. So the second recommendation I give to you is, make the changes from within. Live the haqq that you want to be able to spread to others. It's not saying don't spread it, because we have universal truths that we're able to bring to others, and we're always going to be working on ourselves. We're never going to be the finished product, individually nor collectively. So don't fear that. Embrace that. But know that as we're making that progress, we have to make it sincerely, and we also want to export the progresses that we are making so that others feel the benefit of coming here as well as you and I. Second humble recommendation I make to you. Third humble recommendation that I make to you in order to go forward is the final one that I shall give to you. Is try as best to live Islam proper. When we talked about changing narratives, the master narratives, I kept showing you the difference between how the Quran would speak about these matters, how the ahadith would speak about these matters, versus the way in which we've inherited ideas. I gave you the examples of how in feminist movements, all these ideas came about. And they were there for scaremongering, in order to say, look how brutal and oppressive Islam is. Or the example of how we become so disunited that Shia and Sunnah used to do their Muharram majlis together. It was only the British that divided this. I'm mainly speaking here to a Khawaja community from Indian descent. My grandparents were both from India, so I speak directly to that community at this moment, not to Iraqi, Irani, because I haven't got that, I haven't presented on that topic about division. I've spoken specifically about to the Indian heritage community. You were divided by the British. You don't need to be divided any longer. You don't need to think of your Islam in accordance with the way in which capitalism tells you to think about Islam. You don't need to think about your Islam in terms of colonization and how colonization tells you to live your Islam. You have the space to live your Islam as it is, as it ought to be. Allah yarhamak. Have you been pepper? Is it pepper? And it's been about 4 sneezes, mashallah. You know, I remember when we were growing up, you get these things. Have you got this statement amongst yourselves that if you sneeze 3 times in a row, you're guaranteed to live for 3 days? Have you heard this? Yeah. So, mashallah, inshallah, say it. Allah yatul amrak. Now, the Islam that you and I want doesn't need to be so cultural that the culture itself enshackles us. The whole purpose behind this discussion was breaking the shackle and then mapping out where you want to go for the next 10 years. But if everything is rooted in a culture that someone else set for you, that you've probably even never met, that you've never even heard of, how can it be your religion that you are practicing? You are practicing someone else's religion. I know it's scary. I get it. It's not that I don't have empathy or sympathy for cultural practices. I do. But you don't need to hold on to those and think that that's religion. It's not religion. It's the culture version of the religion. Whatever that thing is. Whatever it is. I'm not going to specifics. I'm not name dropping a particular culture. I'm just saying about deen in general. How much of the way in which you think of your deen is based on the way in which it's been inherited as a practice. And then when you return it back to the Quran, whether actually that matches with it or not. Imagine this statement. Listen, you've all heard this hadith. I'm not telling you anything new. I'm just presenting it to you maybe in a way in which you and I haven't thought about so much. Do you remember that statement from the 6th Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh? Imam says, if you find a hadith which goes against the Quran, what should you do? Why did I look here? Yeah, it's not to say that no one else knew the answer, but even teacher becomes culturalized into thinking where the answer is going to come from. Throw it against the wall. Is there anyone here that doesn't know this hadith before? Is it? MashaAllah, but now you know it. Now you know it. The hadith says, if the hadith is going against the Quran, throw it against the wall. Agreed? Now tell me something. Imagine a culture that is going against the Quran. Imagine a culture that is shackling your thinking. What would As-Sadiq alayhi salam say about it? If he says it about a hadith, what would he say about culture? We don't need to think about our Shi'ism, our Islam, our Sunniism, our monotheism, which has been given to us by colonization, which has been delivered to us by people that are trying to destroy your religion. You have no need to live like that. Look at the difference. Just one example between the way in which we think about some of these things versus the example of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. I've been mentioning to you one of the books by Ayatollah Sheikh Ja'far Subhani. Allah grant him a long life. Anyone remember the name of the book? The Message, which is the biography of the Prophet. As I mentioned, it's my favorite biography of the Prophet. And I mentioned that Sheikh Subhani was the first one to say that the Prophet actually reflected on his own community. أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلَكُمْ. Now, Sheikh Subhani, in his book, mentions that when the Prophet reached the city of Medina, one of the first things he did was enter into a treaty, which is now known as the Constitution of Medina. It's a 40-odd point document, which is called the Constitution of Medina. It is the first constitution, civil rights constitution for faiths, for them to come together, all faiths of Medina to come together and have a charter of the way in which they're going to live. Yeah? This is giant in the history. It's the first in history of humanity that's recorded of this nature. Now, as we stated previously, the way in which we've been thinking about, for example, Islam and the West, or Islam versus the West, or East versus West, or Islam versus Judaism, or Islam versus Christianity. That's the normal narrative, isn't it, that you're given? And as I stated, change these master narratives. Work on that. Work from the asl. Change the way in which people think, and it will drop down their understanding. It will cascade down. The Prophet, when he entered into this peace treaty with the Jews and the Christians of Medina, he actually prefaced the entire constitution with a particular point. Meaning, point one of this constitution, do you know what it said? Anyone who signs up to this, any faith, any tribe, who signs up to this constitution of Medina, you are part of the Muslim Ummah. Think about that. Think about that. This whole idea, this nonsense idea of Shia against Sunni, Muslim against Christian, Muslim against Jew, Muslim against the West. All of it has been given to you by people that want to destroy your religion. The Prophet placed the Jews and the Christians inside the Ummah, not that they were external to the Ummah. Just imagine the way the Prophet thought. He was so confident in his religion. This is key. He was so confident in his religion, he could spread it as it was. He didn't need to change it for the sake of them. He allowed its haqq to prevail because it was haqq. So many of us fear this religion. And then we try to attenuate it, we try to change it in order for it to be in line with the way in which others want us to think about this religion. The Quran, whenever it uses the word ummah, 70% of its time, the isti'malat, the huge usage of the word ummah is all humanity. Not Shia ummah, not Muslim ummah, human ummah. You are one ummah. And then it goes into the ideas of there being also a Muslim ummah and what defines a Muslim ummah versus what defines a human ummah. The last book of this series I'm going to present to you it's available here in the library. It's called The Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the World. There's two versions. There's a very small, thin version, which is around maybe 30, 40 pages long or something. And then there's this one, which is a lot more detailed. This book is one of the most important books in our modern history, arguably. I'm going to read to you just one line from it in the introduction. And in this introduction, he talks about the way in which the Prophet himself set up his own community. He says the following: the author of this book has opened up the world of the Prophet and his contemporaries as few did before him. Who knew that before the Crusades, Muslims on Hajj used to visit the Christian and Jewish sacred sites on their way to Mecca? Who knew that Christians as well as Muslims in the time of the Prophet were given the title mu'mineen? This is amazing. I mentioned this, that the Quran calls the Christians and Jews mu'mineen as well. We actually have the earliest sources where the Prophet, with his own writing and dictation for the treaties that he used to make with the Christians, he called them mu'mineen. This false dialectic that comes from the ahadith that Muslims are Muslims, but the mu'mineen are only Shia. And then they purposely misunderstand verses because of this. Because they don't want to read the Quran first. So they take a version of Shi'ism, which is given to them by certain extremist scholars, that they want to be able to create divide between Shia and Sunni. Allah's messenger, your messenger, in tradition, in the earliest scriptures that we have, and in the Quran, he called the Christians mu'mineen. Imagine the way I would look at my fellow Christian now. Imagine the way I could deliver this message to him. This whole complex that we have, questions that we have about whether non-Muslims are going to get their reward, go to heaven, whether we can work with Christians, whether we're at war with it. All of these things are immediately responded to. Immediately. You change the master narrative. Why? Because you actually follow what the Quran says and not how you've inherited a culturalized version. Who knew that the Christians as well as Muslims in the time of the Prophet were called by the title Al-Mu'mineen, the faithful? Who knew that the Christian knights and warriors sometimes fought side by side with the armies of Islam? Who knew that even crusaders were given safe conduct by Muslim authorities to make pilgrimages to the Christian holy sites controlled by Islam? Dr. Morrow makes a compelling case that the original intent of Muhammad was not to create strictly a Muslim state, but rather a confederation of people from Ahlul Kitab. Number one, Be aware of what's going on. Get your knowledge so you know what's happening. Number 2, live by the values that you and I wish to be able to preach. And number 3, live Islam. Don't be afraid. Have confidence in your religion, that if you were to implement the religion as it is, as it's supposed to be, this is what can yield the changes that you and I wish to be able to bring in the coming decade of the society that we are living in. The bodies of the shuhada lie on the plains of Karbala. These are left open as a means to try to disgrace those who would stand on truth against falsehood. Imagine the Islam that was being perpetuated by Banu Umayyah, and the way in which Muslims now came to think of their religion, when they could behead the grandson of their own prophet and messenger and leave the bodies of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam for 3 days on the open plains of Karbala. This is why when Sayyida Kulthum salamullahi alayha, she was made to walk between the bodies of her family members as a means of torture and punishment on her, she threw herself off that camel. She turned her face towards Medina. She said, "Oh grandfather Rasulullah, come to Karbala and see how your grandson Hussein's body has been left. His head has been severed from his shoulders. His blood gives him his ghusl, and the sands of Karbala give him his kafan." Was it not Sayyida Zainab who came to the body of Aba Abdullah, who then took away that debris, placed her hands underneath the broken body, a body that has been trampled on by no less than 40 hooves, 10 horses trampling upon his chest. She places her hands underneath that body. She raises it slightly towards the sky. She lifts her head towards the heavens and she says, "Ilahi taqabbal minna hadha al-qurban min ali Muhammad." Accept this sacrifice that we have given in your way. How does Sakina sleep? How does Fatima sleep? How does Muhammad al-Baqir sleep? How is it that Sajjad is in his state when they have shackled him and they now shackle the children and take them out of the plains of Karbala? It is said that the children who would sit atop of those camels, they would make the camels run, and sometimes the children would fall off the back of those camels. The mothers would scream out to their captives, "Please, my child has fallen off the back of the camel. They don't have the strength. They don't have the food inside them, the water inside them to catch up towards the caravan. Please stop." The men would turn around and laugh at these mothers, knowing that these 4 children were to be left behind. This is why along the route we know that certain children were left to die, and they have been buried along this way. It is said that 3 days later, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam returns by miracle to bury them. When Aba Abdullah al-Hussein bought the land from the tribe, he said that not only do I buy this land from you, but I buy it with certain conditions. I ask you that when you see our bodies lying here, I want you to come and help us with this burial. And if you cannot, then at least when your children play, tell them to kick some of the sand over our bodies such that our bodies may be covered, rather than the beasts and the wolves and the wild animals come and tear at our flesh. This is the state in which they were left. When Zainul Abidin arrives, he sees that there is this moment, this opportunity to bury the family members. He does so and he makes certain graves. He, as per the wish of Abu Fadl, he buries Abu Fadl by the banks of the river Euphrates. He comes and places Habib ibn Madahir in his own grave, and where the companions are in their own graves. He then comes and places in this pit, in this grave, the family members. He places Akbar by the feet of his father. It is also said that Asghar is placed upon the chest of Aba Abdullah. We ask them why. The Dhakirin say because a father loves to hold his baby on his chest, and a baby loves to be able to rest upon his father's chest. But I ask you, imagine what it must have been like for Sakina when finally these tyrants came and gave a little bit of water. Our Dhakirin say that when they brought water finally on that night, on the night of Sham Ghariban, on the night of strangers and the displaced, as they finally brought the children who were crying Al-Atash water, our Dhakirin say that Sakina took this water. She cried out, Mother Rabab, tell me, where is Asghar? I have always wanted to give my baby brother Asghar some water. Tell me, is there some water I can give to him now that I have it? All she can say is Asghar lies in a grave beside the tents. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Please raise your hands. We join each other in dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world before his coming, Ya Allah, raise us from our graves so that we can partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times, those people in a state of war, poverty, oppression, homelessness, disease and disaster. Ya Allah, grant them more safety, security and victory for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, we wish to be able to reform ourselves and our communities so that we are in line with the message of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. Ya Allah, help us to meet with the demands that are given to us by the Imam, so that next year when we come back here to listen to the maqtal of Imam, we have reformed ourselves in order to please him, inshaAllah. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Matim Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. پریشانم که از